And let's see, let me see. Are you guys able to see my slides okay and hear me okay? Can the audience?
Looks good.
Excellent. So again, thank you all. Today, the topic we're going to discuss is overcoming imposter phenomenon. And you know, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. I think as a young attending, and even now I continue to struggle with this at times, and I think it needs to be openly discussed because it is a common problem that many of us have. You know, initially when I started this presentation, it was entitled Overcoming Imposter Syndrome, but the more I looked into the literature, I realized that syndrome, you know, someone had mentioned that the word syndrome has a negative connotation to it. It implies that this is a disease process and something negative, bad about it. And really, I want to change our thought process about that today. I want us to think about this as a common problem, normalize in some ways for us to look for ways to overcome this and intervene on it. So with that in mind, I'll get started. Oops. Let's see. There we go. So today we're going to talk about the definition of imposter syndrome, kind of look at some of the theory. There are 5 types of imposter syndrome, so we'll touch on that. We'll look at behaviors that we engage in on a regular basis that help maintain that imposter within us. And then we'll look a little bit about some of the gender differences with imposter syndrome and what are the costs to us as young professionals in our personal and professional lives. And then finally, I want to touch on some solutions. So to start with the definition of imposter syndrome, I want to reference you guys to Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, their landmark article from 1978, where they identified the imposter phenomenon in high achieving women, dynamics and therapeutic intervention. So, you know, they identified this syndrome or phenomenon, as we're going to call it. They did note that imposter phenomenon is seen in both men and women, and it's associated with individuals with above average abilities, I should say. And really, they define it as an inability to internalize one's accomplishments, or inability to believe, or you believe that your successes are fraudulent. And so they define it also in saying further that despite academic and professional accomplishment, women persist in believing that they are not bright and they have fooled anyone else who thinks otherwise. So very relevant, I think. You know, this slide I bring to mind because, you know, prime example of this is when I was asked to be a guest speaker for this presentation. My first thought was, who, me? I'm not a subject matter expert in this topic or any topic thereof, you know, why I don't have the skill set. So the doubt starts to kick in, the fear of failure starts to kick in, and the imposter emerges. So again, this speaks to how this is very salient for a lot of folks. In fact, one of the studies I looked at said that 70% of professionals will experience imposter phenomenon in their career at some point. So again, I just want to bring this out in the open and a way for us to discuss it. So when we look at the article from Clance and Imes, they give a little bit of theory about this, and I think this is salient for us to think about. First, they note that there's a societal view that women are defined as are not defined as being competent. Rather, women are less able intellectually than men. And they note that when women succeed, it must be because it's a fluke as opposed to, you know, ability. They also go on to talk about women falling into one of 2 categories or one of 2 groups based on family history. In the first is the socially inept or sensitive child. So you have the woman who has a close sibling or a close relative who is the better child, the perfect child, if you will. But this woman falls into the category of never being able to prove herself. You know, she will be always second best in some ways, but that doesn't stop her from trying to succeed. And she will have success with effort, with trying. And she, however, as a result, you know, because she's not valued in that way and some of that's not told to her, she begins to doubt her intellect and her successes. And that's when the imposter emerges for her. In the second theory, you have the woman as the, quote, superior child or perfection with ease. In this situation, the woman or child is told by their parents that they are superior in terms of intellect, personality, talents, appearance. Everything should come with ease because they are naturally inclined that way. But as this woman or child progresses, they realize they have difficulty doing tasks, that it does take hard work to achieve things, and they do have to, quote, work for it. As a result, internally, they realize we're not perfect, right? And as a result of that, they begin to distrust their parents' perceptions, and that leads to the self-doubt. And again, the imposter emerges as a result. So some of these views, I think they're antiquated and not necessarily all true today, but they are still relevant, I think, in some cultures, countries, and environments in which we work. And so I wanted to provide this as background for you when we think about imposter phenomenon. Valerie Young wrote a book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, in which she defines the 5 types of imposters. And I think this is important for us to think about, for those of you that experience this, which type of quote imposter are you, because there are different solutions to each one of these. First, you have the perfectionist. This is the individual that focuses on the how of something. This could be the person that feels like they're the micromanager. They have a difficult time delegating tasks, and even one minor flaw in an otherwise perfect performance leads to failure, leads them to feel that shame, and the imposter surfaces. In the person that is the expert imposter, this is kind of the person that worries about the what or how much, particularly as it relates to knowledge. This is the person that needs to have all the answers, and when they don't, they feel like a failure. And again, as a result, the imposter emerges. In the soloist type of imposter, this is the person who focuses on the who of the project. They really internalize that ability that I should be able to do everything on my own, and seeking help, whether that's in tutoring, mentoring, coaching, is a sign of weakness. And so asking for those things leads to this sense of shame, and again, the imposter arising. You have the natural genius, and this kind of blends in with what I spoke about earlier, the perfection with ease. This is the person that really things come seemingly natural to them, smart without studying, that sort of thing. So they feel that, things should be easy for them, and things get reinforced because they have a natural inclination to it. So when they encounter things that are challenging or new to them, and they subsequently fail at, that allows the imposter to emerge. And then finally, we have the superhuman type of imposter. This is the individual that's worried about the how much you can do, how many roles you can juggle, how many titles you can have, multitasking in some ways, if you will, and your ability to fail in any one of those roles, whether it's a parent, a leader, a physician, whatever it is, that allows the imposter to emerge. And I will say, I think that one, the superhuman, describes me best in when I think about my dealings with the imposter phenomenon. So this slide kind of breaks down some of the solutions as they relate to these different types of imposters. For the perfectionist, the micromanager, really learning to delegate tasks, celebrate achievements, and taking your mistakes and strides to learn from them is important. For the expert or the know-it-all person, focusing on just-in-time learning, instead of having this notion that they have to have all the knowledge all the time, perhaps before performing a task or doing something challenged, then they do this demand learning. Also, having a mentor to share their experience, validate their self-worth can be important. As a soloist, the person always lacking in the ability to ask for help, working on task delegation is important, and seeking support from their advisors, superiors to help delegate that task will help normalize this idea that they don't need to rely on just themselves. For the natural genius, giving ourselves grace is important, realizing that we are a work in progress, really identifying specific changeable behaviors to improve is important, and recognizing lifelong learning and skill building are important, can be helpful to overcome this type of imposter. And then finally, for the superhuman, the multitasker, I think it's important to think about self-nurturing and seeking internal validation as opposed to looking for external validation. Also focusing on wellness, that work-life balance, integration is important, and then realizing multitasking is a myth. I think a quote I commonly tell myself, and I've heard in the past, is to do 2 things at once is to do neither. So these are just some of the solutions for the specific types of imposters, and we'll come back to that. What are some of the behaviors that we engage in that perhaps help maintain the imposter within us? This is something that Clance and Ames also discussed, and there are 4 particular behaviors. First, diligence and hard work. We have this constant fear of being discovered as stupid or failures, and as a result of that, we work harder and more diligently to overcome that, to not be seen as a phony. And that does lead to success. However, though that success and those feelings, those good feelings, are short-lived, the phoniness ultimately resurfaces and the imposter arises again. People will also participate in intellectual flattery to win over their superiors and colleagues. And that means they will favor their opinions instead of testing their own hypotheses, or they will refrain from even asserting their own beliefs. And so that will really reinforce the imposter because they haven't tested their own thoughts. People will sometimes engage in charm and perceptiveness, really where the aim is to be liked and special. And they use those behaviors to win over approval. But these can be things like using friendliness, sexuality, and really unhealthy self-defeating behaviors that limit the internal-based confidence development. And that leads to the imposter emerging, because at some point you're going to realize that yes, you're getting validation, but it's because of behaviors you've done, not opposed to the work you're doing. And then finally, we have negative consequences. Women, again, are sometimes seen who, especially those who display confidence in their ability, are viewed by others as non-nurturing, hostile, assertive, unfriendly, rude, judgmental, or aggressive. And so, because we don't want to feel those feelings, we suppress the urge to speak up sometimes. We instead lay in the background, become docile or quiet. And that allows the imposter to reemerge. And I will say, I think I've been a victim of this, especially as a female physician attending leading rounds, and it can be debilitating at times. So thinking a little bit about the gender differences with IP, both men and women experience this, as I said, but there are differences. Women consistently have lower expectancies than men of their ability to perform on a wide variety of tasks. And women wait often to be overqualified before applying for a job, whereas men will apply when they have met some or not all of the criteria. So even success and failures are viewed differently. For women, when they have success, they attribute it to luck or effort. Even that effort is, time limited in some ways, and they don't view that success as because of inherent ability. When they experience failures, that seeks to reinforce the imposter. Even in negative feedback, again, gives way to that self-doubt and fear of failure that leads to the imposter emerging. For men, it's the opposite. When they have success, they tend to attribute that to an internal stable factor of ability. And when they have failure, they tend to attribute that more to luck or the task difficulty itself. One of the interesting things is when men experience imposter phenomenon, it does cause a higher level of stress and anxiety. And they speculate that this is due to societal pressures not to fail. So really, to sum up some of these differences, I think Sheryl Sandberg does it very nicely in this quote, and that is both men and women are susceptible to imposter syndrome, but women tend to experience it more intensely and be more limited by it. So to touch on some of the costs related to this phenomenon, first, there's low self-esteem, confidence, barriers, and insecurities that arise. That leads to anxiety, depression, frustration for inability to meet these self-imposed standards. We have this feeling of impending doom. We're always waiting to be discovered as a phony, and that leads to fear of failure. That fear of failure limits our willingness to seize new opportunities, and that creates a self-perpetuating cycle. Imposter phenomenon can also be a barrier to career development and leadership positions. One study from the American College of Physicians noted that while women have made up greater than 50% of medical school graduates for years, there's a lack of female physicians in leadership positions. And while this can be attributed to multiple factors, one of the things to consider is the role that imposter phenomenon plays. Imposter phenomenon can also be a barrier to promotion, salary increases, and a negative correlation to job satisfaction, which may have an impact on retention, job retention, and something for us to think about. So now I want to turn and talk about solutions for imposter phenomenon. I think this is a multi-pronged approach to think about. And one of the things first to think about is the systemic contributions. And that's where I'll refer you to this great article from the Harvard Business Review in February of 2021 by Tulushan and Buri. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing those names. The article is entitled "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome," and it's a different take than what we commonly see when we think about this phenomenon. They note that instead of fixing women at work, we should fix the places where women work. And they examine the contributions to imposter phenomenon, which include things like systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, the lack of role models for women in their workplaces. some of the microaggressions that can be seen, the expectations and assumptions from stereotypes and racism. And then this notion of that women not belonging in places where white and male dominated workplaces. So in summation, when we look at this article, the authors conclude that really to overcome this, we need to create an environment that fosters a variety of leadership styles and in a diverse racial, ethnic, and gender identities are seen, and they're just as professional as the current model. So I think this is a very insightful article. I encourage you guys to take a look at it when you have time. And now I want to talk about some solutions that are really based on the references I've already mentioned, some of the books I've put up, some of my own personal experiences, and some of those subtypes of imposters that we spoke about earlier. So first, I think celebrating achievements is really important. I don't think we do that enough. But one of the things to help build your confidence is to give yourself credit, to think about what your past accomplishments are, whether those are projects, presentations, promotions, or leadership positions. We need to be our own cheerleader. We need to be our own advocates and be positive affirmations for ourselves. When we get at the same time, I think we all struggle to do this. And when that happens, you reviewing objective markers can be helpful. So things like looking at your own CV, appreciating those accomplishments, what articles and journal things have you published, book chapters, what titles and positions have you held, what honors and awards have you received. And then another way to do this is with visible positive affirmations, whether that's having a vision board that kind of outlines what your successes are, what your goals are in the future, positive quotes that I will put on Post-its on my computer to monitor, in the vanity mirror in your bathroom that you see on a regular basis. Look at the thank you notes, the emails that you've received from your prior mentees as a way to, again, give yourself credit for the great work that you're doing and celebrate those achievements. Thinking about fear and failure is important. We need to accept that failure is part of the process. So we cannot fear it. We have to instead, as a group, I think, share these experiences, share these failures to help normalize them and to learn from them. We have to really recognize that we can't let failure shatter our confidence or impede our ability to try something new or hard just because we've never done it before. This is how we grow, by challenging ourselves. So we can't be afraid of that failure. I think changing, reframing our mindset is also important. This is something in the new year I'm really working on, and that's how do you talk to yourself? Are you being kind? Are you using good words? Are you using positive affirmations? It's important to recognize that you are doing amazing things, right? In fact, you've already done them. That's how you got to where you are, and that's why people are asking you to do more, right? So use that, appreciate those things to solidify the confidence and relieve that self-doubt. I think it's important to also remember you are a role model, whether that's for your children, your trainees, your co-faculty. They are looking up to you for a reason, for the work that you've done. You have a proven track record, and so appreciate those things. For those of us that struggle with that natural genius phenomenon, again, giving yourself grace is really important. I think in general, we tend to be our toughest critics, right? And we tend to be the hardest on ourselves. But the question is why? What advice would you give your friend or colleague that's in the same position as you? And why do you treat yourself any differently? It's really important to treat yourself as you would your friends. You want to forgive yourself, and you really want to learn from your mistakes, maximize those opportunities. In some of these articles, they talk about group therapy being very beneficial, the ability to have a mentor, a supervisor, a coach, or even to speak with your friends. And really, this is an opportunity to discuss perception versus reality, how we see ourselves versus how others see us, really help us understand where's our internal logic flawed and how can we change that. Also an opportunity to role play and think about the worst case scenario. So what if your fear is realized? How do we continue to grow from those opportunities? And then becoming a mentor, again, for the imposter types of expert and soloist, being a mentor can be very helpful to share obstacles, solutions, and accomplishments. It does serve to build self-confidence and really help you value yourself, which is very key to overcoming imposter phenomenon. And then I want to finally say a word about saying no. I think this is a double-edged sword that we have to think about. On the one hand, you want to consider your time and interest. Is a project that someone comes to you, or an article or a position, is this just a resume builder, or is this a passion project? Is this something you really want to do and make a difference? And if you say yes to this, what are you saying no to inherently? On the other hand, we want to try to continue to grow professionally despite feeling challenged and having a lack of knowledge, experience, and fear of failure. So it's delicate balance. But at the end of the day, it's important to recognize that if you say no too many times, you will fall victim to this vicious cycle where people view you as disinterested, disengaged, and then you're no longer asked to participate in these opportunities. You get overlooked, and then the imposter reemerges because you feel as if you're not good enough to be asked. So with that, I will leave you with a quote from Nelson Mandela or Franklin Roosevelt. I've seen different sources, and that is, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the willingness to move forward in spite of it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and you can find applicability in both your personal and professional lives. Happy to answer any questions that you guys may have at this time. Here's some references.
Crystal, thanks so much. You're getting some love there in the chat too.